Welcome to Mental Healthy, the podcast where we share stories of the professionals and experts worldwide working in the mental health field. Here's your host, Dr. Kenyon Knapp.
Well, welcome everyone to the Mental Healthy Podcast. I'm glad to have you with us here today. We're in our book series here about scholarship of people working here at Liberty, and I've got a great guest with me today, Dr. Brian Kelley. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and you wrote a big textbook not too long ago. You want to show everyone the book?
It is pretty big. I put my life's work into this thing right here.
Yeah, let's hold it here in the middle. It's Applied Cognitive Psychology, and that is a big old hoss of a book. Look at that. Really deep and brainy. But talking about brainy, why don't you introduce yourself? And I'm familiar with you since we work together, but some of the listeners might not be. So give them a little bit of background on yourself.
Well, I'm grateful to be here and grateful to be at Liberty. I've been here for about 6 years. And my background, we'll go way back for just a minute. In undergrad, I was a psychology and pre-med biology major, which was a great combination. Lots of insight was developed from the combination of those two programs of study. Then I went on to get a doctorate degree in psychology with concentrations in pharmacology, toxicology, neuroscience. Then I did a medical fellowship in psychiatry and neurology, where I did a lot of really bench to bedside and then bedside to community level work, which was a lot of fun, very exciting. And then I did some additional cross training in public health. And then, from there, I've just been a professor, entrepreneur, scientist, I guess writer.
Mm-hmm. And he said all kinds of neat projects, but that's a rabbit trail. I won't go down that one. but you can tell that, you're a psychology professor, but you're not the average psychology professor. You've got definitely a medical training and medical specialty as well that some folks just don't have.
Yeah, I would say that the majority of my focus is really in sort of the combination of psychology and biology in terms of research, and not just research, but really making something transformational. How can we take the knowledge that we have and improve the way that healthcare is being delivered, the way medicine works as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. That's a different little angle that some people don't have, which is great, and we appreciate you delivering that here. Now, I know some of the listeners watching go like, oh, man, I'd love to write a textbook one day, and that's just cool. Or a lot of people aspire to that, like it's a bucket list kind of thing in life. Give us a feel, like how long did it take to write a book like that focused on applied cognitive psychology? And I know you also have like an ethical and biblical integration focus as well. How long did it take to do that?
Man, I can't even add it up. I've been writing, content, for all of my classes, for professional presentations for, a long time now. Then you just get to this stage where you tell yourself like, oh, I'm really close to converting all of this disparate content into a book. And that's always a lie, by the way. Like, you're never close, right? So, but if you knew the truth, you would never do it. So one day I sat down thinking, I think it wouldn't take much,
Mm-hmm.
So after, I'd say, at least 10 years of like writing and collecting material, I thought, I'm going to make the conversion here to a textbook. And I'd say it probably took about 18 months of work, working every single day, thinking about it, while you're eating breakfast, or walking to your car. It's just, once you start, it's hard to turn it off. And then it's not just me. There's always a team that's doing an effort like this. So there's someone helping out with graphics, someone helping out with the editing and stuff like that. So we had a really great team kind of support this project, but it was an enormous effort. And the science stuff is always changing, right?
Yeah.
That's the nature of science. So I assume that in several years that might be, out of date or maybe needing some revisions. But I really wanted the biblical stuff to be solid, to be right, to speak the truth and not, have a lot of my, personal commentary involved in it. So I would say that's actually what really, produced the intensity of time and energy, is getting that right, but also getting it right in the context of the field of cognitive psychology.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the ethical integration it's its own field in of itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I really wanted the students who are reading this to know a lot about how we think, in part to be better thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
Then I wanted them to learn how to think and obviously act ethically. Well, I just don't think you can do either one of those without the biblical integration. So there's no way I would have written this book without the biblical integration piece really being the driver of the entire book.
Yeah, well, that's great. Now, I'm just thinking, too, when you write a psychology book, I mean, a lot of people listening probably go, "Oh yeah, I know, like psychology, like Freud or something like that." But you've got a real angle here. You've got applied cognitive psychology. So when students hear that, like, what are some of the applications or angles that students should understand about cognitive psychology?
I mean, the obvious one, and I think it's popular here, is how can I use this information for, let's say, counseling, right, for clinical psychology. I mean, one of the gold standards in psychological interventions is cognitive behavioral therapy. So up until this book was written here, we didn't actually have a cognitive class. So these students were moving into graduate school where the primary model was cognitive behavioral therapy, and they didn't really have a good cognitive background. So I really just thought this was mission critical for the work that we're doing. Now, aside from the cognitive behavioral therapy side of things, we need to be better learners. We need to be better thinkers, and that's kind of universal. But most fields really are kind of looking at how do people think and how do people act on their thinking. So IO psychology, industrial organizational psychology, the business side of psychology is where you see a lot of cognitive work. I tell the students all the time, like, if you really want to make money in this field, specialize in cognitive and go into app development.
Oh, really?
Right, human factor psychology is another application of cognitive, where how do you make an app like intuitive? How do you make it so that, I mean, this is the bad side of it, people stay on it longer. I guarantee, like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok have hired many psychologists to help design these apps to keep people engaged. I mean, you want it to be visually engaging, right?
Yeah.
You want it to be tactily, touch engaging. You want it to be auditorily engaging, and so on. So psychologists are really all over the place when it comes to this type of work, like marketing, website design, and even if you're in the criminal justice field, you probably have a cognitive psychology person working on jury selection, how to make the right pitch when you're talking to folks in the court.
Yeah.
So this is one of the reasons why the American Psychological Association and the American Psychological Society both say that this should be a core class in every program of psychology across the nation.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I know our students enjoy it. Now, one thing, too, I want to ask you about the book. I know there's lots of psychology books out there and all, but there's a number of qualities about your book that are unique or unusual in a lot of psychology books. Could you share with the listeners a little bit about what sort of separates your book from the others? That's
a great question. What makes this funny is I actually hate reading.
Really?
I don't find any enjoyment in it at all. I find it laborious, right? So with that in mind for myself, I wanted to write a book that people might want to read. So knowing cognitive psychology, right? Like, that's where cognitive psychology application comes in. I wanted to write a book where it wasn't just, 700 pages of black and white text, where it's just me annotating the field. Like, it's like an encyclopedia. People just don't want to read that. So the book is actually broken up with a lot of subsections. And one of the subsections, obviously, ethical integration, biblical integration. There's a number of expert commentaries in the book. I believe you did one of those expert commentaries for me. Yeah. And there's also a section of the book where there's like little mini article reviews. I don't think people realize when they're reading a textbook, and then in parentheses, there's a Smith et al. 2020, that's referencing a study. And most studies are imperfect. So I took out, some actually really good studies and emphasized how these studies were done. And then explained how the methodology of that study is helpful to the understanding of cognitive psychology. But I also captured some really bad studies that oftentimes make the national or international news and kind of unraveled kind of, the truth or lack thereof around that. So you won't make it past a couple of pages before you get into some of these additional materials. And then someone's like, why would I want to read more? And part of my rationale there is actually those are easier sections to read, and they help you make a emotional connection to the other material. And when I would say abstract material like cognitive psychology has emotional connection, it becomes concrete, and it's just easier to remember, understand, and so forth. And the applied part for me was applying it to your own life. Both personally and professionally. So my goal was that the students wouldn't make it past even a couple of pages where they didn't read something that would say, today, you can make some changes in your life to, say, improve efficiency or effectiveness of learning, or always learning. So the first section of every single chapter is dedicated to how the content in this chapter can be used to transform your life in a positive way. And I think those are about maybe 8 to 12 pages long, but it's very straightforward, very structured, where you can follow some steps to improve the way you're thinking, making decisions, engaging in, planning, all of that stuff. So that was a really fun part for me, because I went back to like when I was a student, like, man, it was so hard. You'd read a chapter or read a page and you'd close your book, like your roommate's like, what did you just study? Like, I have no idea, right? So I'm like, I wanted to kind of break out of that pattern of, a book that just wasn't fun to read. Not that a textbook is ever fun to read, but I want this to be the most fun, book that you could read that's a textbook.
Yeah, well, it's practical because you give those real life examples of famous cases and all.
Oh, yeah.
And what some of y'all may not realize is Dr. Kelley works with doctoral students all the time doing dissertation work and research design and statistics and all that. So you've got the expertise to critique, these famous studies and things that have been in the media about this is what this research study means. And
I can tell you one real quick that was really fun.
Please, yeah.
Every year, it's in the news, they talk about, what countries and what cities are the happiest. Right? And, you watch that and you think like, well, that's interesting. So me and another a graduate student, we sort of dug into that. And you find out that one of the ways they determine how happy people are, you ready for this?
Sure.
How close do you live to a perfume shop?
Good grief.
I mean, that's absurd, right?
Yeah.
And then how many times have you been to the theater, not a movie theater, like a live performance of like a Broadway play kind of thing? And there was just a bunch of questions like that were like, wait a minute now. I mean, I lived in a pretty rural area for a while.
Yeah.
I also lived in Washington, D.C. for a while. I don't even know where a perfume shop would even be.
I don't either.
So what happened was all of those questions were framed to really be much more metropolitan, right, and stuff like. So then you find out that all of this stuff was a setup. But every year, this makes the national, international news. So what was fun is, in the review of that article, I reviewed a couple other articles. So the countries that were highest on happiness, I looked them up. They were also the highest on prescriptions for antidepressant medications.
How about that?
So it just seems kind of strange to me that we're saying these are the happiest places, happiest cities. Then you dig deep and you find out the questions and the way that they measured that were absurd. Then you also find out that those same countries and same cities have the highest rates of antidepressant medication prescriptions. So it seems like maybe it's not what they say it is.
Yeah. But if you're happy and you take drugs and pills, I mean, hey,
I mean, that could be part of the argument, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It just seems inconsistent to me. So some of the fun of the book was unraveling stuff like that. But there was another article that we reviewed, and it was about active versus passive learning, right? So if you're just reading, you're probably not learning. If you're just listening and you're not really engaged, you're probably not learning as well. So it's also about how are ways in which we can strategize to just learn better. And I think that's what really transformed me when I was a student, because I was psychology and biology, and I took a class on neuroplasticity. I'm like, if all this stuff is true, then I should be able to do these things to make my brain work better. And, for a time it worked better.
I think it's working fine. You ought to see all the research it's cranking out. But anyway, let me move on. What about, I know you've got a real focus on ethical and biblical integration in the book. What drove you or motivated you to include that?
Because I think people struggle with ethics because at the end of the day, they make it relative, right? It's like, well, all ethics are personal. I'm like, well, that might be true, but we have ethical models and ethical theories, and we have, ways that we can approach questions that can be systematized, right? So we can say, how are you approaching this problem, right? Well, just personally, that's not good enough. Can you imagine going to a counselor and them saying that? Like, how are you going to treat my depression? I don't know. Different ways, different approaches. Whatever I see works one moment to the next. You'd say, well, never mind. I'm going to maybe go somewhere else. So I wanted students to realize that the field of ethics is a philosophical and scientific discipline, and psychologists should not only learn from it, but add to it. So, and also, I just wanted, Christian students to be able to think better about ethics so they can have better arguments for the things that they argue, that they believe, that they hold dear. It's not enough to say, well, this is what's important to me, and someone says, why? Why should that be important to anyone other than you? And I wanted to give folks the tools to make strong, logical arguments using deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, using evidence, right, from science, from the literature, from the Bible, and all of that stuff.
Yeah. I hear your brain and your heart talking when you talk about that.
Well, that's how you have to write a book, right?
That's right. Well, if it's going to be a good book, you're going to have passion with it. So
or not a bad book. That's what I was aiming for.
Oh, I get that. Well, let me ask you, you've touched on this a good bit already about some of the big findings of the book and the way you make it practical with these real-life case studies and all that. What are some of the other big findings you had in the book about cognitive psychology and maybe applications, or I don't know what. What are the big findings you had?
I think one of the biggest ones that surprises people is that we're really bad about thinking about our own thinking. Like, this is the reason why, like, even like applications in counseling, when someone says, how have you been doing the last couple of weeks? We don't know how we've been doing the last couple of weeks. We might be able to say with a high level of certainty how we've been doing the last couple of hours, maybe the last 24 hours. But, 2 weeks ago, what were you doing 2 weeks ago? I mean, you have to really sit down and kind of think, and then you find out that what you were thinking about that was 2 weeks ago was actually a month ago, but it was also maybe impacted by that experience being a repetition of another experience from 2 years ago. So I think people just don't understand, how their own thinking works.
Yeah.
And I think what's really profound for people is when they learn about something called the default mode network, right? This might be one of the most profound things in the book. When we're tired, when we're stressed out, when we're in a situation that feels like uncertain to us, our brain goes to a default mode. What that means is we tend to do what we've always done.
Yeah.
So maybe not even in that situation. Maybe we haven't been in that situation before. But if your default mode network is to doom scroll on your phone, then you're stressed out and you have to read a chapter, you have to write a paper, you have to prepare for a presentation. And it just feels very overwhelming. That stress sort of can trigger a reaction where you're like, you know what, I feel uncomfortable. I'm just going to go into what I've always done. And so whatever you've practiced the most is what your default is going to be, which is why I tell folks all the time, the way you were parented is how you're going to parent. Now, if you had great parents, your default mode network is going to be awesome. You should be really thankful for that.
Yeah.
But if that wasn't the case, you tell yourself, I'll never parent that way. Well, we're parents, right?
Yeah.
You're not always at your optimal performance when you're parenting. You're tired, you're hungry, you're stressed out, you're driving kids everywhere, you're dropping them off, you're picking them up, right? You're trying to get work done. And then what happens is you go to that default mode network. You're like, well, I didn't yell at my kids today. And like, well, actually 4 times you did. You have no memory of that. So I want folks to, when they're reading something like this, to think about, like, how can I change something like that? Like, what would it take to change your default mode network? Which is changeable, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard, right? So, I used to wake up in the morning. I'd wake up, take a shower, grab a cup of coffee, drink it in the car, drive to work. And from the time that my alarm went off, the time I'm in my office, it was maybe 30 minutes. So it was like just rushing to get there. I'm like,
wow,
that's not great. So I switched that. It took a long time, but I wake up in the morning now. I drink a huge glass of water, which I don't like. I like water as much as I like reading. But I've been doing that now for a while, and my default mode network now is to just do that. But, a lot of effort. So how do you, teach yourself to change your default mode network? Well, there's strategies for that. Like, you have to approach that the same way you would approach going to the gym and working out, increasing weights, increasing repetitions, increasing number of exercises. Like, you wouldn't go to the gym and just mess around. You would have what? A plan. And maybe you don't have a plan, so you would have someone at the gym who works there help build a plan for you. So this book is that. The book is aiming to support you by helping you make a plan based on research, based on best practices, to elevate your thinking and to, if need be, change your default mode network around some things that maybe aren't the best options, best behaviors for you.
That makes sense. Well, let me ask you this, just sort of following up on that. Is your default mode network pretty much the same thing as the way we ruminate about things?
Sure.
Or is that, okay.
Yeah, it all feeds into the same thing. Like, if your default mode network is anxiety, and you're tired and you're laying in bed at night, that's what your brain's going to focus on. Then what happens is you get better at focusing on that type of stuff. the neuroplasticity kicks in, like the brain changes kick in, and you become a much more better anxiety producer. So what happens over time as you practice anxiety, you practice depression, you practice distraction, you practice shallow thinking. I mean, that becomes the way your brain works. So a lot of counseling is kind of the point you were getting to is brain training.
Okay.
Right? Hence the cognitive part of cognitive behavioral. Change your brain, change your behavior. But sometimes the exact opposite works. Change your behavior, and then your cognitions will oftentimes follow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard that.
That's been the fun of putting a book like this together is I kind of put in this book the kind of things that I wish I would have had access to when I was studying this field that could have been more, transformative to not just your professional life, like as a student, but your personal life.
Okay. Hey everyone, this is Dr. Knapp. I wanted to tell you about Empower Counseling PC. It's a Forest, Virginia-based counseling agency that serves clients in all areas of mental health with in-person therapy sessions or telehealth within the state of Virginia. With 27 counselors, a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and an eating disorder registered dietitian, their mission is to treat the whole person. They specialize in eating disorders, postpartum, play therapy, PTSD, substance abuse, infertility, grief, marital issues, and so much more. Please visit them at www.empowercounseling.info to learn more about their services and their compassionate team. Now back to the podcast. So there's this default mode network of the way we think. I got that. That made a lot of sense. Let me ask you this, moving on. What's maybe a thing or two about the way the brain works that might surprise people? Because I know you're in psychology, but you've also got this medical training as well, working at med schools and stuff. What about the brain might surprise us?
Oh, that's a fun one. It's like the great myths, right, of the brain and kind of psychology. And some of these are very, very enduring, even though the evidence has been out that they're not true for like decades. But the left brain, right brain one is probably the one I still hear a lot about.
Yeah.
I went to a presentation, probably 9 months ago, and the presenter was talking about left brain, right brain phenomenon, and the cover of the book had like left brain, right brain stuff. I'm thinking this has been debunked for probably 20 years. So I still think people like to simplify complex things like that, like, oh, you're more analytical, so you're this. We're all of those things all the time. It's just we're not always good at it all of the time. So what happens is you have things like that, like, oh, you're left brain, right brain, but then you also have a more complex kind of myth that emerges from that, where it's like, oh, we have different learning styles, and we all have different learning styles. We all have different intelligences, and that's not really true either, right? We have things that we're good at and things that we're less good at, but most of us learn through very, very similar mechanisms. So I hear this one a lot. Oh, I'm an auditory learner. I'm like, everyone is an auditory learner if their auditory system is working. Oh, I'm a visual learner. Everyone's a visual learner. What you really want to say is we learn better when we're involving multiple modalities. So I just tell students, if we know that, right, you have to be an active learner, which means you have to transform things. So my big, comment in class is draw it to know it.
Okay.
So if you're reading something, or a page or two of text, convert that text to an image.
Okay.
So so now what if you're looking at an image? Convert the image to text, right? You have to convert the way that you're thinking about something to something else. And if you can do that, if you can take a picture and write about it, it's because you know the picture.
Yeah.
Right. If you can take something that you're reading about and make a picture for it, then that means you understand the content. So this is a way to kind of, train our brain to engage those multiple modalities.
Yeah. Well, let me follow up with you about that right brain, left brain thing, because I'll admit I'm maybe like some of the listeners. I was an undergrad psychology major over 30 years ago. And I remember reading about Spearman was doing these studies on splitting the corpus callosum, and back when people were having epilepsy and they had like seizures, and then they said, oh, if you cut the corpus callosum because the right brain does the left side and all this, that it would like fix epilepsy and all this. What's some of the newer understanding about right brain, left brain?
That's actually how all this stuff came about.
Yeah.
Is your corpus callosum cut?
No.
Mine's not either. And the fibers, the axons that connect the left brain to the right brain are some of the fastest neurons, the axons in the entire body.
Wow.
So the brain, is equipped to rapidly. It's like 400 miles per hour if you want an exact number. And it's only going like 4 to 6 centimeters. So That's really, really fast. Right?
Yeah.
So unless your corpus callosum is cut, you're not left brain or right brain. But that's what produced the myth 30, 40 years ago is once you cut it, some really crazy stuff was discovered by the way that people thought and functioned. But they took that, right? They took that finding, which only applied to the 30 people that had their corpus callosum cut.
Yeah.
And that became the story about how our hemispheres work.
Yeah.
Probably in reality, it's more accurate to say that we're front-brained and back-brained. Right?
Okay.
The front of her brain is the planning, the reasoning, and stuff, and the impulse control, delayed gratification. And the back of the brain is kind of that immediate response to things. So it's probably more accurate to say that we're front brain or back brain. And the default mode network is that back brain kind of phenomenon. Like, I'm going to do what I've always done. And the front of your brain's like, but this isn't working for you very well. Maybe we should try something new. And if we have energy and we're excited and motivated, then we can do it. But as soon as we're tired, it goes back to that back brain kind of pattern. I mean, that's still an oversimplification, right?
Yeah.
That was my criticism from the beginning, but it's at least a more accurate oversimplification of left brain versus right brain. Now, it's not to say that if you got into a car accident and you damage the left side of your brain, that unique things wouldn't happen. It's true. You would have speech loss on your left side. Right? On the right side of your brain, if it got damaged, you would lose your ability to add the emotional tone to speech.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is most of our arguments are not about what people say, it's how they say it. So it's just interesting how complex something is, and that's why we have to have multiple parts of the brain engaged in the analysis of it. It's just too complicated to be analyzed all at one time by one structure. So when it comes to understanding something like speech, we have left brain, we have right brain, we have the back of the brain analyzing the visual elements of it. We have things like, gestures, posture, and all of that. So most of the time, most of our brain is being used for most of our daily activities. So the other enduring myth is we only use 10% of our brain.
Really?
I use all of my brain, trust me. Man. So it's this idea, there's so many movies made about that. Man, if we could, access all of our brain power, we would have all these special powers.
Yeah.
Throughout any 24-hour period, we've used all of our brain a lot, and that's why it's tired.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we go to bed. And sometimes, brain work makes you way more tired than physical work when it comes to just going to bed at night.
Well, you're touching on a ton of these different enduring myths that people have about, the right brain, left brain, all this different stuff. That's pretty wild. Goodness. Well, let me ask you this. You've already talked about thinking better and all that. Are there some things we can learn about ways to make our brain work better or think better? Absolutely. And then this goes back to, it's probably been 40, 60 years now, but that, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Mm-hmm.
I'm like, that's an enduring model because it actually speaks to some truth. Okay. And let me give you an example really quick. If parents talk to me about their kid having challenges with anything, the first thing I say is you have to make sure the biology is working. Okay. Like, what does that mean? Was your kid getting enough water? Are they eating healthy foods? Are they sleeping? Are they active enough? Are they getting light? Like all the things that you want to have optimal health. Until those things are addressed, you're probably not going to fully understand any psychological, cognitive things. So when it comes to I want to learn really efficiently and be a really good student, okay, you have to treat your body well because your brain is a part of your body. You can't study dehydrated. You can't study hungry. You can't drink 5 energy drinks and think that you're going to be studying effectively. So I always tell folks, treat your body well, number one, and then find times of the day that you feel are optimal for you when it comes to your clarity of thinking. We don't think clear 24 hours a day. There's some people are they do better in the morning, right? It gets complicated with cortisol and other hormones, epinephrine, energy, and distraction. But some people do really good in the afternoon. I think the data shows that most people can train themselves to have their highest level of productivity in the morning, right? I'd say you wake up after about an hour or so, you get 2 hours of really good work done, and then you have to have a break. So I tell folks, find the time of the day that you feel your brain's working the best, where there's the most clarity, and then start there. Right? This is all about don't set yourself up for failure. Eat well, drink well, take care of yourself. Find 2 hours during the day, and work hard during those 2 hours. Then find ways to expand that 2 hours. Right? But it's like any other kind of energy that we expend. Like if you ask, how many push-ups could you do? I mean, it's kind of a trick question, right? Well, I could do 1 million, I guess, over my entire lifetime if that was my goal. But that's not what people mean when they typically ask that question, right? How many can you do right now?
Yeah.
Right? And I'd just say 35, let's say.
Yeah.
Well, what would happen if you did your 35th one? Like, man, I can't do one more. But you took a 10-second break, just 10 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
I bet you could do 20 more. And they're like, I can't do one more. I'm like, what if you took a 20-second break?
Mm-hmm.
You could do probably 10. Then a 30-second break, you could do 5. So even with some pretty small breaks, you can find out that you can push, let's say, your body a little bit harder. The same thing applies to our brain. You can study for probably, honestly, not as long as people think, 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Then you can push it to 10, push it to 20. It takes a lot of work to train your brain to have extended periods of concentration and output. I mean, there's neurosurgeons out there that do like 11-hour surgeries. Like, that's why there's 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, and a 7-year residency. Like, it's that much time it takes to get that brain to be able to focus for that long and maintain that level of motivation. So the last part was kind of key too, right? Like, what's your motivation? Like, if your motivation was high, getting through a textbook's a lot easier, even a bad one, right? Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of it is, I tell folks, like, get it basically like a journal, if you want to call it that, and write down when you're studying, write down what you're studying. Make some notes about how effective your studying was, and part of that will be measured by faculty, right? They'll say you failed your exam. So obviously what you did wasn't working. Probably what you did wasn't working. It wasn't that it wasn't long enough. That's what I see for a lot of first-year students. Mm-hmm. Default mode network, right? Like, you didn't do well on your exam. Like, I tried so hard. Mm-hmm. I say, I bet you did everything that you did in high school, and you did it for twice as long. Like, yeah, like I did. I'm like, it's not working. You're going to have to find a different way to do this, because if you did it twice as long and you failed, and you do it twice as long still, and you get a C, at some point, you can't put 40 hours of work into one class. Mm-hmm. So that's why ideally the students maybe read something like this pretty early on in their academic career, so they can learn how to learn, mm-hmm. right? And they can learn for themselves what are the strategies that would be most beneficial for different classes, different times of the day, different types of exams or assessments.
Yeah. I liked what you said at the beginning, too, about when you work with a kid and, if they're not getting the right nutrition or something like that, I guess part of good diagnosis is ruling out other things. And one of the easier things to rule out is the medical aspect of it, that the kid's not, if he seems inattentive, well, you find out if he's, hypoglycemic or something like that, because that could mimic, inattention and all, when it's really just a sugar issue in the blood, or I guess there's other examples like that.
My favorite one as a professor is when students say, I'm really struggling to pay attention to get my work done. And let's say it's like a stats class, like a neuroscience class, which is already pretty hard. Yeah. And they're drinking like an energy drink. I'm like, how many of those have you had today? And they're like, I don't know, 5 to 7.
Ooh.
Like, it's like a 140-pound like female student. And I'm thinking, like, that's an incredible amount of, just say, caffeine that you consumed. Mm-hmm. Like, have you ever thought that maybe this much caffeine, I don't know, a gram, I did the math with one of the students, like, that's a gram, you can hold that in your hand, a gram of caffeine that you've had between the time you woke up and 1 o'clock. Yeah. Like, tell me all the lovely stuff that you've eaten today, a Pop-Tart, mm-hmm. candy bar. I'm like, well, maybe you would feel better if you dialed back the energy drinks, maybe had a yogurt or some whole grain toast with peanut butter on it. And people have a really hard time making that shift, though. I mean, once you practice that. But one student's like, I felt so much better after I got rid of all of that stuff, and I was able to pay attention a lot more. I'm like, go figure. Who would have thought? Mm-hmm. But it typically takes, people really struggling before they realize that the what they're doing is not working very well. I like for students to be able to avoid that. There's a whole section in this book about caffeine and about energy drinks and thinking.
Yeah. Well, that relates to where they are in life, like you're saying. I mean, I see them walking all over campus with those energy drinks and coffees and everything else. And so, it does affect them. That makes a lot of sense.
I'm also like, water's free, people. These energy drinks are really expensive. I'm like, how much are you spending a month on energy drinks? Mm-hmm. So I tell them to do the math on that, and that's awfully inspiring too. When you figure out they spend $1,200 on coffee and energy drinks in a year, that's a lot of money.
It really is. Well, let me ask you this: obviously, here at Liberty, the distinctive of our whole school is Christian integration approach to mental health, whether it's psychology or counseling or social work or different other disciplines. What advice would you give Christians from a cognitive perspective?
That's a good one, because that's what when I sat down to write this book, that was my number one goal. And I think if they understand their own thinking, right, and they understand how important it is to put the right information in their brain, they'd probably be more attentive to what they put there, right? I'm like, if you're watching, violent movies and other stuff that might be inappropriate, and you're spending your time, doom scrolling, just for hours. You're watching TikTok, and a year later, when someone says, tell me about this phenomenon, tell me about this topic, that's what's in your brain. That's all you have access to. And if you're not reading your Bible and someone asks you a question, you're not going to give a biblical answer. We tend to give answers that are the easiest to access for our brain.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing that's the easiest to access are the things that we've been exposed to and practiced thinking about the most. So my strategy here is to remind students, if you read your Bible frequently, let's say every day, and you're praying about things, that will be what's on the forefront of your mind. So when people ask you a question, your brain doesn't go to some news cast they saw a week before. It goes to the truth. And then the goal would be to equip them to evaluate, facts that might be occurring from the scientific world, right? And to be able to ask the hard questions. So a big part of this book was how do you ask hard questions, right? If someone's saying that this is their truth, you can say, well, wait a minute now, there seems to be some inconsistencies there. Logically that doesn't flow right. You're saying one thing that you believe, another thing that you believe, but they sort of contradict each other. And most people in the world have a lot of comfort in those contradictions. But as a critical thinker and as a biblical thinker, we should not be so quick to embrace those contradictions.
Yeah. I wanted to make a joke and say, as long as there are contradictions, we love them.
It's true.
But then when you think about it like you're doing, that's just stupid. And I guess if people realize it's stupid, it might challenge them to,
and that's kind of
not,
the goal.
not do it. Yeah.
People are, by the default mode network, they're just intellectually lazy.
Yeah.
Right. If you assign something to students to read and you don't give them a quiz or a test or a paper, the odds are they're not going to read it. They'll fill up their time with something else. Right. So it's just the nature of how we are. We all, we want to be healthier. We want to lose weight. We want to get more sleep. Well, few people accomplish all of those things, including myself. So it's hard to do those things. So part of this book was to guide people on how to make a plan for that for themselves. If you can't do it for yourself, how on earth are you going to become a counselor, psychologist, and ask other people to do it? And that's the big question I ask students in class. I'm like, you want to become a psychologist, and you want to work with people that have experienced significant trauma and maybe addiction, then I'm saying read the whole chapter. And you're like, that's too much. You're saying that's too much for you to have that discipline, but you're asking someone who's on heroin, who's had terrible life experiences, to do something radically different. I'm like, have a little empathy here in terms of that, and have empathy by building your own behavioral change plan and seeing how well you can stick to it.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, let's hold up the book again real quick and just show everyone, because sometimes people forget exactly the title. So it's applied cognitive psychology, and if this is really interesting to me, especially all the applications and examples you're giving. So if a person wanted to get a copy of this book, where would they go to get it?
I think probably the easiest place to go would be the publisher's website. You probably get the best deal there. So it'd be like kendallhunt.com.
Okay.
And you can either search by the title or by my name. And it's probably on Amazon and some other places by now as well. There's an ebook, a physical book. I try to encourage people, again, best practices, get the physical book and underline it, make comments, make notes. But sometimes it's nice to have both in case you're traveling somewhere and you can pull it up on a tablet or something like that. I obviously have my own physical copy, and I have an ebook copy as well. Sometimes it's nice to have my own ebook to look for a couple of keywords to figure out where I said stuff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, we are getting to that time. I want to respect your time and that of the listeners, because we try to keep it pithy here. But what are some final thoughts you might have for the listeners? Maybe something God put on your heart or mind that you want to share with them as we wrap it up.
I think about, what it says in Romans about, we don't do the things we should do, right? and we do the things that we shouldn't. So, a big part of what I thought about when I was writing this book is, how to help people kind of think about their own thinking and to really begin to have their thinking grounded in the truth of the Scriptures. So that's why there's a lot of biblical integration in this book. And I would hope it was presented very humbly, because we know how hard it is to control our thinking. But, if you want to improve your relationship with Jesus Christ, it's going to be relational, and it's going to be about our thinking, and from there, our actions.
Mm-hmm.
And then other people can only see our actions, and then from that, they make interpretations about our thinking.
Mm-hmm.
That's why this is so important, and that's kind of what I was thinking when I put the effort into writing this. This wasn't a money maker for me. This was a ministry for me.
Mm-hmm. I'm saying I can tell that just with your motivation and passion about all of it. And so much of what you said too, you're connecting the dots in my own head too. Like what you think about, you become stronger. It's your default mode.
Yeah.
So I think about even faith. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. And so how do you have more faith? Well, you read the Word of God more, and then it starts to become your default mode.
Yes.
And then you start to live that way. And that's just one example with faith, but you've got so many more examples in the book of...
Well, grace.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be amazing for Christians if that became our default mode network?
Mm-hmm. Just to be more gracious to people and forgiving and
kind.
All that, yeah.
Beatitudes kind of stuff. Like, if that was the Christian's default mode network, we'd have a lot more Christians.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, makes sense to me, y'all. And I hope it's challenging to you listeners to hear all this, because, the level of application Dr. Kelley has in the book is really amazing. And it's keeping it real. It's not dry. Like some psychology stuff is, like you're saying, all text and just boring. But you keep it real in this book, and it keeps it engaging, which I really loved when I was reading it. So thank you.
I haven't read it yet, but some people said they really liked it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. I appreciate you being on the podcast today.
It's fun being here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and sharing with the listeners. And I hope you all check it out. Applied Cognitive Psychology and Dr. Brian Kelley. So
it just came out in 2024, so it's fresh off the presses.
Hot off the press.
Yeah.
This is good stuff. Thanks for being here. And thank you also for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to having you join us next time here on Mental Healthy. Have a good day.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mental Healthy. If you want to hear more episodes, please hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts, and head to linktree.com/mentalhealthypodcast for all of our social media platforms with the latest mental healthy content. If you have a story to share that relates to what we discussed in in or any other episode, please contact us at mentalhealthy2020@gmail.com. That's mentalhealthy2020@gmail.com. Thank you, and God bless.